My family, the high and mighty culinary snobs of L.A. Drittage, had no idea that the grease truck daughter they were so ashamed of was also the one person who could destroy their entire legacy with a single blog post. My name is Maya Valois. To my family, I am the black sheep, the culinary school dropout who committed the ultimate sin. I traded their generations-old, Michelin-starred French restaurant for a food truck. A bright yellow, slightly dented truck I named the Saffron Pilgrim. To them, Lee Ridge was a temple. It was all about stiff white linens, whisper quiet service, and sauces that took 3 days to make. My mother, Genevieve, the matriarch of the Valois culinary dynasty, often said that fine dining was the last bastion of true civilization. My older brother, Hugo, who took over as executive chef, agreed. He was all about foams, gels, and microgreens. He talked about the palate as if it were a complex mathematical equation. My world was different. My world was loud. It smelled like toasted cumin, sizzling garlic, and cardamom. I served saffron-infused chicken over rice to construction workers, nurses, and students. I believed good food should be accessible, honest, and eaten with your hands if you felt like it. This philosophical divide wasn't just a friendly disagreement. It was a source of deep, unending shame for them. Every family gathering was a ritual of humiliation. My mother would look at my calloused hands, stained faintly yellow from turmeric, and sigh. She would ask if I was still enjoying my little hobby. Hugo would make jokes about my grease wagon and ask if I needed him to co-sign a loan for a real apartment. They pitied me. They saw me as a lost cause, a failed chef playing in a metal box on wheels. What they didn't know was that I was living 2 lives. By day, I was Maya, the food truck girl. But by night, I was the Gilded Fork. 8 years ago, fueled by frustration and a lot of cheap wine, I started an anonymous food blog. I wanted to write about the food I loved, the hidden gems, the taco stands, and the noodle shops that my family would never deign to enter. I wrote with a brutal, uncompromising honesty. I didn't care about decor or service pedigree. I cared about the food, the soul of it. The blog exploded. Within 2 years, the Gilded Fork became the most powerful and feared food critic in the country. My anonymous reviews could make or break a restaurant. A positive review meant a 6-month waiting list. A negative one was a death sentence. Chefs across the nation spoke my name in whispers, terrified I might walk into their establishment. The irony was delicious. I would sit at those dreadful Sunday dinners at Lord Ridge, listening to my mother and brother obsessively discuss the latest Gilded Fork review. They would analyze every word, trying to figure out who this mystery critic was. Hugo once declared that the Gilded Fork must be an older European gentleman, someone with true classical training, to have such a discerning palate. I just nodded and asked them to pass the bread, my hands smelling faintly of the same spices I had praised in my review of a hole-in-the-wall Ethiopian place that morning. My food truck wasn't just a passion. It was my cover. It was the perfect disguise. No one would ever suspect that the woman slinging rice bowls from a truck was the same person deciding the fate of 3-star Michelin establishments. My truck was successful. Very successful. I now owned a fleet of 5 Saffron Pilgrim trucks. But the blog became an empire. It spawned a subscription service, paid consultations, and eventually a private investment fund called Artisan Culinary Ventures. I used my anonymous reputation to identify and invest in young, authentic chefs, the ones who, like me, were being ignored by the establishment. By my 30th birthday, I was one of the most powerful people in the American food scene. My family just thought I had finally managed to save up enough to get my truck's transmission fixed. Then, the world shifted. The old guard was failing. Tastes were changing. People didn't want stuffy, $300 meals as much as they used to. They wanted authenticity. They wanted the kind of food I championed. And Lo Ridge was dying. My brother Hugo, in his arrogance, had refused to adapt. He kept serving the same tired dishes his grandfather had. The restaurant was hemorrhaging money. The reviews from mainstream critics were polite but lukewarm. The buzz was gone. They were desperate. I found this out, like everyone else, when they posted a cringeworthy open letter on their website. It was a flowery, pretentious plea, begging the Gilded Fork to visit Lord Ridge. They wrote that they were confident their temple of gastronomy would impress even the most modern critic. It was a Hail Mary, a public cry for help. At the same time, I received a different kind of plea. My assistant at Artisan Culinary Ventures informed me that Ridge had applied for a massive last-ditch buyout from our fund. They were pitching their legacy as a prime investment opportunity. They had no idea they were begging for rescue from the same person. From me. A slow, cold anger, the kind that had been simmering for a decade, began to build in my chest. All those years of mockery. All those pitying looks. All those jokes about my hobby. I saw a path. Not just to save myself the trouble of dealing with them, but to finally definitively end the game. I instructed my assistant to schedule the investment pitch. I told her to book the main boardroom at our corporate headquarters, the one on the 40th floor with the panoramic view of the city. Then, I logged into the Gilded Fork's official email. I replied to my brother's public plea. I wrote that the Gilded Fork accepted their invitation and would be dining with them. I set both appointments for the same day. The investment pitch at 10 in the morning. The restaurant review at 1 in the afternoon. The night before, my phone buzzed. It was a voicemail from Hugo. His voice was strained, arrogant. He told me he heard I was having some truck trouble and that a city inspector was coming by. He strongly suggested I take the day off. He said he and Mother were having a very important high-stakes meeting to save the restaurant, and the last thing they needed was their failure of a daughter parked down the street, embarrassing them with her little grease truck. He had no idea he was talking to the high-stakes meeting. He had no idea he was trying to shoo away the very critic he was praying for. I slept perfectly. The next morning, I did not put on my usual saffron pilgrim t-shirt. I wore a custom-tailored black suit. I put on the leather-soled heels I kept for investor meetings. I looked every bit the part of the anonymous, powerful CEO I had become. I arrived at my office building, the headquarters of Artisan Culinary Ventures, and took the private elevator to the 40th floor. I sat at the head of the massive, polished granite conference table and waited. At 10 o'clock sharp, my assistant showed them in. My mother, Genevieve, and my brother, Hugo. They were dressed in their absolute finest, looking nervous and out of place. They walked in, their eyes wide at the sheer scale of the office. The floor-to-ceiling windows, the expensive art, the army of assistants outside. Then they saw me. Their faces froze. It was a perfect, beautiful moment of pure cognitive dissonance. They couldn't compute what they were seeing. Maya. Hugo's voice cracked. What on earth are you doing here? Did you follow us? My mother looked horrified. She visibly scanned the room, probably assuming I was the one serving the coffee. I just smiled. I gestured to the 2 empty chairs opposite me. Please, sit. You have a pitch to make. Hugo started to protest, his face turning red. He said this was a private meeting with the head of Artisan Ventures. He demanded to know where the CEO was. My assistant, a sharp woman named Clara, stepped forward. She informed him that he was speaking to the CEO. The silence that followed was heavier than anything in my mother's restaurant. I watched them. I watched my mother's hand go to her pearls. I watched my brother's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and finally a dawning, sickening horror. You. My mother whispered. Her voice was thin, frail. It can't be. I leaned forward. Let's not waste time. You're here to sell me your restaurant. Convince me. For the next 20 minutes, I let them stumble through their presentation. It was painful to watch. They talked about legacy, tradition, and the Valois name. They used all the same words they had used to beat me down my entire life. Hugo tried to explain their finances, but the numbers were a disaster. He was clearly in over his head. When they finally finished, they just stared at me, defeated. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just tapped my pen on the granite table. Your business model is obsolete, I said finally. My voice was calm, cold. You have zero adaptability. Your brand is toxic to the modern consumer. You are arrogant, you have refused to innovate, and you are, based on these numbers, 3 months from total bankruptcy. Hugo tried to interrupt, to defend their legacy. I held up my hand and he flinched. He actually flinched. The Valois name, I continued, means nothing to me. In fact, it is a liability. Ridge isn't an asset. It is a teardown. My mother looked like she was going to faint. But, family, Maya, we are your family. Family, I repeated. I leaned back. That is an interesting word. I seem to recall my family telling me I was a failure, that I was a grease wagon operator. My own brother told me just last night to hide myself so I wouldn't embarrass him during his big meeting. Hugo went pale. He knew I had him. You came here today for a buyout, I said. And you're going to get one. Artisan Ventures will acquire El Ordage, effective immediately. We will take on your debts. You will be solvent. A tiny spark of relief flickered in my mother's eyes. Thank you, Maya. I knew you wouldn't let us. I cut her off. I am acquiring it, however, to close it. The spark died. I'm closing Lord Riddige. I'm gutting the entire building. The velvet chairs, the dusty paintings, all of it. I'm turning it into a high-end food hall. It will be a celebration of global street food. We'll have a taqueria, a ramen bar, a bow stall. And in the center, as the main anchor, will be the flagship brick-and-mortar location of the Saffron Pilgrim. My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I am going to build an empire dedicated to everything you taught me to hate. And I'm going to use your legacy as the foundation. As for you two, I continued, turning to my brother. Your employment is terminated. You can, of course, apply for a position like anyone else. Perhaps as a line cook. My mother, I'm sure, could be a hostess. My team will review your applications. This is monstrous, my mother finally choked out. You're destroying your grandfather's legacy. I stood up. Your grandfather's legacy was drowning in its own arrogance. I'm the only one who actually learned how to build something. You just lived off the fumes. I started to walk out of the room. I was almost at the door when Hugo, in a last desperate act, said, Wait, the review. The Gilded Fork. They are coming today. They will save us. A good review it will. I stopped. I turned around slowly. I had almost forgotten. Ah, yes. The review. I walked back to the table. I picked up my personal laptop and opened it. I turned the screen toward them. On the screen was the back end of the Gilded Fork's website. My dashboard. My name on the admin panel. And in the center, a draft of a new post titled Elge Riddige, an autopsy of arrogance. I watched the last bit of color drain from their faces. I watched two worlds collide and shatter in their minds. The grease truck daughter. The billionaire investor. The ruthless critic. They were all me. I am the Gilded Fork, I said quietly. Hugo just stared, his mouth hanging open. My mother finally completely crumpled into her chair. I closed the laptop. The review is scathing, I told them. It details every single flaw. The dated food, the stuffy atmosphere, the desperate arrogance. It was scheduled to post at 1 o'clock, right about the time I was supposed to be arriving for my reservation. Please, my mother whispered. Don't. Please, Maya. I looked at her. All those years, I had just wanted a little respect. A simple acknowledgement that my passion was valid. It would have cost them nothing. But they chose cruelty. They chose mockery. I deleted the post. They both let out a shaky breath of relief. It is not worth my time, I said. The restaurant is already dead. I don't need to write its obituary. I walked out of the conference room, leaving them sitting there in the silence, their entire world reduced to rubble. My assistant, Clara, was waiting. She informed me they would be escorted out of the building. I took the elevator down to the ground floor. I walked out into the bright sunshine. I went to my car and drove to the warehouse where my food truck was parked. I changed out of my suit and into my t-shirt and apron. I fired up the grill. The smell of saffron and cumin filled the air. I drove my truck to my usual spot downtown. I opened the window. Within 5 minutes, there was a line of people waiting. I smiled. I was back in my world. The one I built. The one that was real. That night, my phone was a mess of texts and missed calls from every relative I had. I ignored them all. I sat in my quiet, minimalist apartment, a place my family had never seen, and drank a beer. I had spent a decade being their disappointment. They would spend the rest of their lives knowing they begged for scraps from the empire I built. Their temple was closed. My kitchen was open. And I was, for the first time, completely and totally free.